The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.
Okay, and our second speaker in this session is Stephen Jan, who's going to talk to us about computer simulation of musical evolution, a lesson from Wales. As in the animal, not the country.
If you don't mind, I'll do this the old-fashioned way, and I'm just giving out paper which, in the established style of musicological conferences, I'll read out if that's okay. So, leaving aside the use of computers for the analysis of music, the computer synthesis of music, conducted variously under the rubrics of evolutionary computation, computer simulation of musical evolution, and musical meta creation, among others, it's made rapid progress over the last 15 years. Whatever the method underlying the synthesis, combination, due to algorithms, crowdsourcing, or biocomputation, music simulation systems have expanded the boundaries of computation and have produced music which is interesting and convincing. Whilst not wishing to diminish its success, a significant portion of this work has arguably been conducted with too much focus on the mechanics of computation and on the aesthetic of the products, and with insufficient reflection on the evolutionary functional context of what is being attempted. In particular, music is often taken as an immutable atomic given, with little consideration of its evolutionary history or function, how it relates to language, meaning, and physicality, or how these etiological factors influence upon the methodologies chosen for simulation. In saying this, I'm referring to those simulations which aim to produce music which is recognisable and comprehensible to humans. While I am not denying the possibility of non-anthropocentric creativity, the generation of music which is beyond humans' perceptual cognitive reach, and which might only be produced or easily by machines, it remains at present largely a theoretical possibility. What we term music is related to what we term language, not as discrete and distinct categories, but as opposite ends of a continuum of social, emotive localizations, which include infant directed speech. In early hominins, i.e. modern humans and our immediate ancestors, proto-language or music language appears to have slowly diverged into music and language, with the emotive, melodic and rhythmic aspects of the proto-language becoming more concentrated in music, and the social, semantic and syntactic aspects becoming more concentrated in language. Despite this divergence, both preserve traces of their proto-linguistic ancestor. Music retains certain lexical grammatical elements, such as combinatorial rules of chord progression and phrase concatenation, and language retains certain melodic emotional elements, such as the presence of intonation in the majority of languages and pitch inflection even in non-tonal languages. Brown hypothesizes the relationship between language and music as shown in Figure 1, which represents two levels of acoustic language reference. The phonological level of language concerns phonemes and their assembly into words and phrases. In music, this level concerns pitches and their assembly into motives and phrases. The meaning level in language relates to propositional syntax, which specifies temporal and behavioural relationships between subjects and objects and phrase, and which is based on the relationship between actors and those acted upon. In music, this level relates to pitch blending syntax, which correlates sound structures with their explicit effects. At its far left-hand side, the continuum, the top part of Figure 1, represents language as the use of sound for referential meaning, and at its far right-hand side represents music, in its acoustic mode, as the use of sound for emotive meaning. Even though pure language and pure music are never wholly mixed, there are a number of intermediate states between these two extremes, which afford evidence that the bifurcation of music language is not yet total, and that there are therefore modes of communication which, while primarily linguistic, retain significant traces of musicality and vice versa. Music and language divide a sound stream into discrete particles owing to the segmentation pressures described by Gestalt psychology, specifically the phenomenon of chunking. One might term these particles musemes, musical memes, and lexemes, language memes, respectively. Both are implicated in syntactic structure and referential function, stronger in language than in music, and both possess emotional expressive content, stronger in music than in language. Given this segmentational tendency, and the consequent formation of particular entities from a larger pool of sonic raw materials, it is likely that at some point in our prehistory, the variation, replication, selection, VRS algorithm booted up a universal Darwinian process, booted up, a universal Darwinian process was initiated, and music, linguistic, cultural evolution followed. An almost inevitable consequence of universal Darwinism is the generation of multi-level structures from flat, undifferentiated raw materials, be they the amino acids of DNA or the sound fragments of museums or lexemes upon which it operates. Such recursive hierarchical organisation arises from the nesting of chunks at a given level within a chunk at the next higher level, and the associated evolution of the syntax to regulate it. Kirby's computer simulations of language evolution have verified the feasibility of this process. In human music, for example, uniparametric style forms and style shapes conglomerate to form multiparametric style structures. These short units coalesce into phrases which then assemble into larger structural sections and so on, up to the global level of the movement of the work. The acid test of universal Darwinism is, obviously enough, its universality. While it is a hypothesis which is intrinsically difficult to falsify, one can buttress it by amassing, as analogously traditional evolutionary biologists have, a large body of evidence in its favour. Some such evidence comes in the form of animal vocalizations, some zoomusicologists refer to them as musics, the study of which reveals a number of characteristics which are directly analogous to human music and language, and which are therefore pertinent to their computer simulation. Like human music and language, the song of the humpback whale has a recursive hierarchical structure. A series of distinct music-linguistic entities, in combination, engender a structure at the next higher level. And indeed, many of the following observations are also applicable to the songs of certain bird species. In phrase formation, shown in figure 2, the basic building block is a unit, a single sound parcel, equivalent to our constituent note, with a specific pitch, shape, timbre, and duration. Units are combined into phrases, equivalent to longer proteins, of up to 15 seconds duration. Phrases normally have at least 6 units and may be divided into sub-phrases, shorter proteins, of up to 7 seconds duration, each with a normal minimum of 3 minutes. 2 or more phrases are combined, sometimes by repetition, into themes of up to 2 minutes duration. Themes assemble in groups of up to 10 to form the songs themselves, lasting up to 12 minutes. If a song is repeated without a significant pause, it forms a song session, the longest recorded example of which is over 20 hours. While the songs of different compact groups are dissimilar in content, owing to variations in the configuration of their subphrases, the basic recursive hierarchical structure remains constant across the species. This implies a genetic foundation for vocalization, similar to the perceptual cognitive constraints operative in humans, and partly regulated by the FOXP2 gene. Perhaps the genetic basis for segmentation is common to certain primates and cetaceans, being an ancestral homology. Beyond interpod differences, there is also evidence of intrapod variation. Comparing the same pod over successive years, their songs change, and this occurs during the active summer singing period, and not as a result of intermigration or inter-forgetting. Specifically, there is a mutation of subphrases, adding, deleting, modifying units, and at a higher hierarchic level, there is a mutation of themes by means of substitution of subphrases. While the biological context for this mutability is sexual selection, because songs are produced by males as part of mate attraction and competition rituals, the changes themselves are cultural evolutionary. There is a genetic foundation for all animal vocalizations, kind of creative mutability observed in humans and whales is almost always driven by some form of mimetic evolution. Whale vocalizations are presently neither musical nor linguistic, but on account of having attributes of both forms of communication, they are proto or musilinguistic. Perhaps they will bifurcate at some point in the future, as is hypothesized to have happened in hominids, into even more complex and lyrical whale music and fully compositional, i.e. segmented, syntactic whale language. There are several caveats to this, however. For one thing, music is an intentional object. A dog is presumably oblivious to music as music because humans interpreted sound patterns in ways the dog does not. It cannot. More fundamentally, intentionality, not only in the engagement of music, but in the production and reception of language, presupposes consciousness. A future whale language would therefore imply whale consciousness, or at least it would require, to reiterate Brown's assertion, a developed form of propositional syntax based on relationships between actors and those acted upon. Such syntax appears a likely consequence of those numerous systems of social organisation where animals must negotiate relationships in the ultimate service of their individual, selfish genetic advantage. Indeed, Carruthers hypothesises that propositional syntax itself underpins and motivates consciousness, arguing that all domain-specific conscious and unconscious thinking operates by accessing and manipulating the representations of the language faculty. More specifically, the claim is that all non-domain-specific conscious and unconscious thoughts implicate representations in what Chomsky calls logical form. Where these representations are only in logical form, the thoughts in question will be non-conscious ones. But where the logical form representation is used to generate a full-blown phonological representation, an imagined sentence, the thought will generally be conscious. And as represented in figure 3, domain-specific thought, for example, a whale's conception of geometry, the pod's position in relation to other pods, and number of conspecifics in the pod, for instance, could eventually be integrated by the kind of domain general logical form underpinning human language. If the proteins already constituting whale vocalizations come to token such a logical form, it would then potentially be accessible to a whale's theory of mind module if and when evolved, and thus made conscious. Given this, and as Blackmore would argue, a whale would then be able to answer in the affirmative the question, am I conscious now? As cultural evolution finds high-level novelty, and thus an expansion of society's conceptual and expressive vocabulary by means of processes operating via mimetically based Darwinism, so biological evolution finds low-level novelty, and thus an expansion of its replicators or vehicles or species survival vocabulary by means of processes operating via genetically based Darwinism. In this sense, the problem space exploration characteristic of evolution is a form of creativity. It's tempting to term this Darwinian creativity, but because in a universal Darwinian view, all creativity, natural and cultural, is driven by the VRS algorithm, the term is tautological. If creativity is a process of generating novelty such that new ways of connecting existing elements within a problem space are found, or new areas of a problem space are investigated, or a problem space is redesigned in order to locate more radical solutions, then these three categories, Bowden's combinatorial, exploratory, and transformational creativity respectively, readily describe processes intrinsic to universal Darwinism. Whale song arguably involves all three forms of creativity. Its subphrases are assortatively reconfined, the hypervolume of all possible songs is progressively explored, and the systemic level of organisation may in principle be transformed by the power of the VRS algorithm to expand the range of replicable combinations of units and subphrases. Thus, a whale analogue to tonality might, in principle, become an analogue to atonality. This discussion has said little on the computer simulation of musical evolution itself, but the observations made are, I would suggest, directly relevant to all who seek to use computers to emulate human creativity. In summary, universal Darwinism allows us to regard seemingly similar phenomena using the same conceptual framework. The sounds of music, the sounds of words, and certain vocalizations of animals arguably devolve to the same thing. They are replicated cultural patterns or proteins using lexemes. Most animal vocalizations are social, emotive. They communicate visible feelings, often apropos relationships with conspecifics. This attribute is burned into music and language as well. We can usually tell from someone's tone of voice whether they are happy or sad, even if the words they use say the opposite. And the character of a piece of music is usually readily discernible. A special feature of language is that social emotive sound particles become associated either iconically or indexically with objects in the real world and concepts arising from interactions with these objects, giving complex semantics and a necessarily richer syntax on top of the existing phonology. To social and emotive, one should add also the body. Music and physical movement are inseparable, and as further evidenced by primate vocalizations and their associated movements are likely to have been so for early hominins. It is likely that whale song is at a stage in its evolution reached by early hominins around the point of the bifurcation of music language into their current trajectories. Whales await the cognitive revolution, itself partly driven by music language, which bootstrapped this process. The implications of these points for computer simulations of music are that simulation should ensure that the fundamental musical units manipulated by the system make perceptual cognitive sense, certainly if the emulation of anthropocentric or zoocentric creativity intended. Simulation should attempt to incorporate not just the phonetic and syntactic dimensions, but also the semantic. In this way, the resulting music makes contact with a social, emotive, embodied musical-linguistic dimension, central in the early evolution of music. And simulation should also recognise the element of sexual selection. While something like the whole story, it is likely that human music, and almost certainly whale song, evolved partly as a result of male displays of reproductive fitness. These shoulds are not intended to sound authoritarian and peremptory, but if recreating a similar, albeit counterfactual path without taken by human music is the aim of computer simulations, and other aims and other strategies are possible and valuable, then it makes sense to go with the grain of universal Darwinism, to try to reconnect music with sociality, emotion, and physicality, and to see music and language in their common social, emotive, and embodied driving forces as two sides of the same evolutionary coin. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And with that, we've actually nearly caught up, so we have time for questions. Questions? Everyone's rereading the paper.
David read out specifically into your conclusion, you see that you're pointing out that, so far, considering the system which has been developed for generating music using computational creativity approach, and focused on, let's call that single agent, so you have a system which somehow, using some sort of black magic, is producing the music. Do you believe that, according also to what nature is telling us, it would be better to have a multi-agent approach in which basically the different agents are coming up with different type of music, and they somehow complement or battle for achieving some sources which are not famous in this case.
Yes. I mean, in many ways, Marcello's work and Eduardo's work is very much in this tradition, in that agents are seen not only as cooperating but also competing with each other. And they have, as Marcello was saying so eloquently, they have interests, they have motivations, and they have desires. So I think simply coding for musical patterns that are exchanged between cold black boxes doesn't quite kind of replicate the conditions that obtained in our own evolution, and that we have to bring in, if at all possible, and of course the algorithms are really complicated, but we have to bring in things like physicality, the fact that musical patterns are, in many ways, representations of physical movement, representations of bodily image schemata, they're representations also, as I was saying, of mate attraction strategies, the idea that an individual's genetic fitness is often judged by a potential mate in terms of the richness and diversity of the patterning that that individual can produce. So I think all of these dimensions, the sort of the physical element really, and the underlying co-evolutionary genetic element, I think need to be more strongly foregrounded than they have in a lot of research that's been conducted to date.
Maybe time for one more very quick question. Anyone's got one?
So, my question is, you said that waves in a way are created agents. So my question is, do you think there's a difference between human creativity and the way in which waves actually compose their music?
I'm not sure there's much of a difference. I think humans are very good at rationalising what we do retrospectively. And I think we're very good at developing complex theories that sort of describe what we do. But I think the basic process, if you take a mean-centred perspective, is the same. Effectively, you have an environment which is provided by our perceptual cognitive systems within which mimetic reproduction and replication takes place. So it's, again, to use a well-worn analogy, our bodies and minds, bodies and brains provide a kind of hardware in which the software is running. And that software, I think, in terms of whale music evolution, is not different in principle to the sort of musical software running on human brains.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.